Most people hear a simple sentence like, save $100 a month, and instantly assume it is too small to matter. It feels like a drop of water in a desert where prices rise faster than anyone can keep up. But what if that small drop hides something no one has ever explained properly? What if $100, repeated quietly, month after month, triggers a chain reaction that reshapes a person's entire financial future long before they even notice it happening? And what if the real reason people never see this transformation is because the early stages look completely ordinary, almost invisible, until a sudden moment when everything shifts? This is the mystery behind small savings that almost everyone misunderstands. They imagine saving as a slow climb. In reality, it behaves more like a fuse. Nothing seems to happen at first, but once the spark reaches the right point, the outcome becomes impossible to stop. The surprising part is that this fuse does not require high income or extraordinary discipline. It only needs consistency, time, and a basic understanding of how money quietly multiplies in the background. That multiplication is not magic, even though it feels like it. It is simply the way growth behaves when it is allowed to stay uninterrupted. To understand this, it helps to step back into the past, long before modern finance existed. Long before digital banks, apps, or investment platforms, people noticed something strange. When they traded goods, grain, or metals, the side that kept a small surplus started building influence across the trading routes. That surplus gave them stability when others struggled. It let them buy resources when shortages appeared. It created opportunities during times of uncertainty. If a farmer stored just a little more seed grain each season, he was the one ready for the next planting. If a merchant held a small reserve of silver after each journey, he was the one ready to buy when competition hesitated. These people were not richer because they worked harder. They were richer because their small reserves created choices when others had none. This simple truth held for centuries, but something changed during the rise of modern banking. In the early industrial era, the idea of saving shifted from simply storing resources to multiplying them. People began keeping deposits in banks, not because they trusted the system completely, but because the system promised something powerful: interest. Even tiny deposits, when protected and allowed to grow, began gaining value on their own. The surprising part is that this system revealed an entirely new pattern. Those who saved small amounts regularly did not just stay stable, they leapfrogged people who earned more but never saved. As factories expanded, wages fluctuated, and economic cycles rose and fell, the same lesson repeated itself. The workers who set aside a small, consistent portion of their income were the ones able to survive downturns without panic. They were the ones who could take opportunities that others missed. Their small reserves acted as a protective buffer, but something else was happening beneath the surface. Their savings were quietly multiplying, following a pattern that becomes visible only over long stretches of time. The early years show almost no difference, but the later years show a transformation that feels impossible compared to the small deposits that started it all. This delayed transformation is what people misunderstand today. Modern life is noisy, rushed, and filled with moments that feel urgent. Bills arrive quickly, prices rise suddenly. It feels difficult to imagine that a simple habit of saving $100 a month could make any measurable difference. But the truth is that most financial changes do not appear in real time. They build quietly in the background until a moment comes when the numbers stop feeling small. That moment often arrives without warning. This quiet building of value is easy to underestimate because nothing dramatic happens in the beginning. A person might save for 6 months and think, what's the point? They might continue for a year and feel like their effort is too small to matter. They might compare their savings to the lifestyle of others and assume they are falling behind. But during all of these doubts, something deeper is happening. Each deposit is stacking on the previous one, and each month's growth is stacking on every month that came before it. It is a slow, steady layering that eventually becomes a structure. The real turning point, however, comes when growth begins feeding on itself. This is the part most people never see until it is too late to benefit from starting early. Growth has phases. The early phase feels almost flat. The middle phase begins to curve upward. The later phase rises so sharply that it feels unreal. And the most surprising part is that this sharp rise does not require massive contributions. It only requires regular contributions combined with time. Imagine someone saving $100 a month during a difficult year. It feels small. It feels slow. But that same person might reach a point years later where their savings are growing faster per year than the total they used to save. That is when the quiet background process suddenly becomes visible. And that is when people finally understand why the small beginning matters far more than the size of the deposits. This is the hidden power behind the idea. Small savings do not stay small. They grow into something that changes opportunities, choices, and the entire sense of financial stability. But before understanding how far this growth can really go, and before seeing how historical patterns explain the shock behind the numbers, we need to understand the moment when simple saving stops being ordinary and starts becoming transformative. That moment arrives in the most unexpected way. and its impact is far greater than anyone imagines. The transformation begins the moment growth overtakes contribution. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a celebration. It simply appears inside the numbers one day, often unnoticed by the person who created it. This is the point where each month's natural growth quietly becomes larger than the $100 being saved. And this single shift changes everything, because after this moment, the saver is no longer the only one building their future. Their money begins working alongside them every hour of every day, without pause. This idea may sound simple on the surface, but the implications reach much deeper, especially when seen through history. During the rise of early financial markets in the 19th and 20th centuries, many ordinary workers adopted small, disciplined saving habits. They had no special knowledge and no extraordinary income, but their consistency placed them on a path that eventually produced results greater than what many business owners experienced. Their savings began to behave like a quiet companion, growing in the background even when their daily life remained difficult. They realized something that still holds true today. The most powerful financial tool available to an ordinary person is not sudden wealth, but predictable, consistent, repeatable action. To understand why this works, imagine two people living in the same city. One earns more and spends freely. The other earns less but sets aside $100 each month without fail. For the first few years, the difference seems invisible. The spender appears ahead, enjoying more comfort. The saver looks ordinary, maybe even behind. But beneath the surface, their paths are separating. One is building a structure that will begin rising sharply. The other is relying only on income that must be earned repeatedly. As the years pass, the saver approaches the phase where growth accelerates while effort remains the same. The spender, even with a higher income, may never reach that point. This difference becomes clearer when studying financial patterns that analysts have observed for generations. Growth behaves like a slow wave at first, barely noticeable. But when allowed to continue without interruption, it becomes a rising curve. This curve is not a theory or a dream. It is visible in savings accounts, long-term investment charts, pension records, and even basic historical data. In every case, early contributions matter far more than the contributor realizes, because the earliest money is given the longest time to grow. And yet, despite this clear pattern, most people underestimate the power of small savings. They imagine success requires large sums, sudden windfalls, or extraordinary opportunities. They do not see that the greatest changes come from habits that feel almost too simple to be important. But history shows that simplicity is exactly what makes these habits effective. Complexity causes hesitation. Simplicity creates momentum. Momentum is the key that connects the quiet act of saving to the greater financial story unfolding across centuries. Momentum transforms a routine deposit into a future advantage. Once momentum expands enough, it begins shaping decisions. The saver becomes more confident. Their stress decreases because they know they have a foundation beneath them. They begin to see choices opening that were not available before. They can wait for the right moment instead of reacting out of urgency. They can prepare for opportunities instead of fearing uncertainty. But to appreciate the full impact of momentum, we must confront a difficult truth. Many people stop saving right before the transformation happens. They look at the early years and assume the results are too small. They pause or reduce their contributions, not realizing they are interrupting the very process that would have changed everything. This pattern has repeated itself in every generation. People get discouraged early, while the strongest growth occurs later. They lose patience at the exact moment patience matters most. That is why understanding this hidden timeline is essential. The beginning feels slow, the middle feels steady, the later years feel unbelievable, and the entire journey depends on staying consistent during the early stage, when the mind doubts the process because the numbers look ordinary. The same timeline also explains why long-term savers historically outperform people who constantly tried to time the perfect moment. Timing demands predicting the future. Saving demands only consistency. And consistency has always been more reliable than prediction. Consider how economic cycles behave. Prices rise and fall, markets fluctuate, jobs change. But through all of this, the person who saves regularly experiences a smooth upward path beneath the daily chaos. Over time, they learn that stability is not created by income alone. It is created by what is kept, protected, and allowed to grow. Even during difficult years when savings feels slow, the habit continues shaping the future. The saver keeps building a base that cannot be taken by uncertainty. Their progress may be invisible, but it is steady. The real impact appears years later when the amount they have quietly accumulated becomes something meaningful, something that changes the direction of their life, something that shocks them when they finally add it up. This shock is not an accident. It is the natural result of a process that rewards patience long after the world stops paying attention. And when we examine how this shock emerges, the story becomes even more surprising. Because the numbers show that $100 a month does not simply add up. It multiplies. And the multiplication becomes so powerful over long spans of time that it feels unreal to anyone who has never experienced it. What begins as something small becomes a force strong enough to carry a person across financial challenges that once seemed overwhelming. This is why the story of saving $100 a month is far more than a lesson in discipline. It is a lesson in how small actions become extraordinary results when given enough time. And the most remarkable part is that the shock waiting at the end of this process is not based on optimistic assumptions. It is based on historical patterns that keep repeating across generations. The final outcome is not luck, it is structure. And when the structure reaches a certain height, the view from the top reveals something most people never expect. There's a moment in every long financial journey when the dots line up and a person realizes they were never chasing a miracle. They were building a quiet machine. The same pattern emerges in every story of people who began with very little. Their early steps felt slow, even pointless, because the system does not reward beginners. It tests them. The real reward comes to those who stay long enough for the curve to bend, because the curve never bends quickly in the beginning. It waits, it watches, and then it accelerates when most people have already stepped aside. This is where the timeline begins to turn. In the late 20th century, several long-term studies tracked ordinary savers across decades. The original focus was not on wealth creation, but on human behavior. Researchers expected to find that people who started with small contributions, especially anything close to $100 a month, would eventually give up. They assumed that slow results would lead to discouragement. Instead, the findings revealed the opposite. The people who contributed consistently, even with the smallest amount, developed a habit so strong that it became part of their identity. And once a habit becomes identity, the direction of a person's life quietly shifts without dramatic announcements. Their future takes a new form long before the transformation becomes visible. By the time these savers reached the midpoint of their journey, something remarkable happened. They no longer looked at their progress in terms of contributions. They looked at it in terms of time. They understood that the system rewards patience, not perfection. As the compounding cycles grew larger, every 12-month period delivered more growth than the previous 12-month period, even though they were contributing the exact same amount. Their patience was beginning to pay them in a currency far more powerful than effort. It was paying them in accumulated time. Modern data highlights the same pattern with even greater clarity. Analysts studied long-term returns across various economic periods. The surprise was not how high the returns were in strong years. The real surprise was how powerful the total result became when uninterrupted contributions met uninterrupted time. Even in the slowest decades, even in the quietest periods, even in the stretches when markets moved sideways, the growth curve began to form its shape in the background. Invisible from month to month, but unstoppable across larger timelines. This is why the difference between starting early and starting late is far greater than people understand. Two savers who contribute the same amount for the same number of years can end with dramatically different outcomes simply because one started sooner. It is not the contribution that creates the shock, it is the time. And the $100 becomes the key that unlocks it. As the story moves toward the present day, a new pattern appears. Younger generations are living in a world filled with faster information, shorter attention spans, and constant noise. The idea of long-term patience feels almost outdated. Quick results are displayed everywhere. But the most powerful financial force still works at the same speed it always has. It has never adjusted itself to match the speed of the modern world. It has never changed its pace to fit human impatience. It has only remained consistent, waiting silently for anyone willing to move at its rhythm. This is why the idea of saving $100 a month feels strange at first. It feels too normal, too small, too simple. People want transformation to begin with something dramatic, but the most dramatic transformations often begin with something small and repetitive. If someone commits to this amount across decades, the quiet monthly contributions begin to stack on top of each other. The total becomes larger than logic predicts. The timeline becomes a partner, not a spectator. And the outcome becomes shocking, not because the system is complicated, but because the system is patient. When economists revisit the historical data, they often highlight the same insight. Almost all large fortunes built by ordinary individuals were created through long-term compounding, not sudden events. Even during periods of economic turbulence, even when the environment felt uncertain, the simple act of steady saving created resilience. The $100 monthly contribution was not the magic number. It was the consistent spark. It lit a path that kept glowing even when everything else felt dim. As this story reaches its final conclusion, a larger truth becomes visible. The outcome of saving $100 a month is not shocking because of the final amount. It is shocking because of the journey it creates inside a person. It trains discipline. It removes fear from the future. It changes the way someone thinks about money, time, and stability. It gives them control in a world where unpredictability is common. And most importantly, it proves that transformation does not require huge beginnings. It requires steady steps. Every long-term saver carries 3 lessons with them. The first lesson is that time is the strongest force in personal finance, and it only works for those who stand beside it long enough. The second lesson is that small steps taken consistently can overpower large steps taken occasionally. The third lesson is that the earlier someone begins, the less pressure they feel later, because the system takes over most of the heavy lifting. As the final thought settles, the story leaves a gentle warning. The same timeline that rewards patience also punishes delay. The months that pass without action do not return. They cannot be replaced. And the curve that could have bent earlier will always bend later for those who wait. If you want to explore more stories like these, stories that reveal how ordinary decisions shape long-term outcomes and how simple steps create unexpected futures, stay connected, subscribe, and continue this journey. The next story may hold the very insight that changes your path.